In this video, I will show you a very simple strategy, and if you start using this strategy, you will win way more games. Before we start, I want to give a quick shout out to Genesis Abel, who left a comment that he now is using this strategy and he gained 100 rating points in 2 days just by using this strategy. To demonstrate it, I will be playing a game against the Sofia chessbot. I also got a comment on my previous video requesting an English opening demonstration, so that is why I will be playing the English opening this time. So what is my strategy exactly? This is just my favorite way of playing chess, and that is to play as solid as possible. So I'm not playing for tricks, I'm not playing for the attack, I'm trying to play the most solid chess I possibly can. Here in the center, I'm gonna go for something very simple, something that here maybe looks a little bit symmetrical, but we will have some difference in the fact that my opponent has 4 pawns on the queen side and I have 4 pawns here. So the first part of my strategy is that we want to play the most solid moves. Then the second part is, once we have castled and we are safe, we want to keep optimizing our pieces, and if possible, don't push too many pawns, because every pawn push could potentially create a weakness. And then we just keep optimizing, and we respond to what our opponent plays, and eventually most of your opponents will make some type of mistake. They will either give away material or they will just make a strategic or positional mistake. Here my opponent is being very aggressive with this early c5. There are basically multiple things I can do here. One thing that is interesting, I'm not saying capturing here is a good move, but one thing that is interesting is that here black would always have an isolated queen's pawn. So for example here, we would be able to win it. But of course, if I capture, black has this sneaky push with pawn to d4. But this is already quite an interesting position, because if we imagine I move my knight, and if they capture here, even though this looks pretty normal, positionally we are already better, because black has this isolated queen's pawn, which will be a weakness for a very long time to come. So that is why I'm going to play this. I will just leave the tension here in the center. There's not really anything we need to worry about. I just want to keep developing, and I want to castle as well. So that is our very simple plan. Some of you have asked me as well, is this strategy possible on every opening? Well, yes and no. You can play every opening as a solid opening, but if you are playing some gambit line and you're giving away a bunch of pawns to get an attack, it's not a smart plan to play this way. You will have to keep looking for the attack. But in very solid positions like the one we have here, this is a very good strategy. I will capture here and allow my opponent to play bishop c5. And it looks like I am helping my opponent, but the main thing I am always focusing on is the fact that in this particular game, my opponent already made a mistake. They already created a weakness, and every opponent will create a weakness at some point. So now this will have to be a masterclass on how to play against this isolated pawn. So the first thing that we want to do here is optimize as many pieces as we possibly can. That's always the same plan, because now we are in the middle game. You can see that this is already developed, so I will usually ignore my pieces that are already developed in the beginning. I will first try to develop my final pieces. So very simple, I have to use this bishop, and this already looks like a solid move. Because I'm also keeping in my mind that since we are fighting against an isolated queen's pawn, it is very strong if I can trade a bunch of pieces, because the more trades we can make, the weaker the opponent's position will get, and the easier it will be for us to grab this pawn. They are pushing. Well, it doesn't really help because we can actually move our knight. As you can see, we can move our knight here, attack this knight, and also attack this bishop. And that also fits in our strategy, our very simple strategy that we want to exchange as much as we possibly can here. And I'm not saying exchanging is always the best in every position, but here it is the case because, of course, my opponent already has a weakness. So it's a very simple middle game plan that we have here, because our opponent gave us that just for free, basically. I can take 2 ways here. I can take with the bishop, and then my opponent can choose. You might think, well, the g-pawn looks crazy, but they could do that if they don't want to exchange too much. But what I think is also fun is taking with his knight and seeing what they are going to do. Probably they will take with the bishop, and then we can take with our bishop. Let me see, for example, this variation. And then we still have this weakness we can fight against. Yeah, I think both of those are good moves. I am just gonna play knight takes f6. I don't think there is a very big difference, but the knight move was a little bit stronger in my opinion, because now this is not looking so great because of bishop h6. So that was what I calculated, that this will lead to more exchanges. And now we are further into the middle game. So again, we are gonna try and use the same strategy as always. The strategy is just optimizing your pieces. So I will not touch any of these pawns. I'm gonna try not to touch them for now. I will just keep optimizing my pieces. We already have a weakness to attack, so we can either play queen a4, I think, or maybe queen to d2 to attack this weakness. Which is the best move? I think they are both good, but the only problem I sometimes have with putting the queen here is you never want to have your queen in front of your rook. You usually want to have your rook in front of your queen. So this looks a little bit annoying, I have to say, this particular line. Interesting in some lines is also to play this move queen to d3, because we can block this pawn from moving, but that wouldn't be the best plan here since my opponent would be able to play this. Sometimes you could also think in a position like this to play something like knight to e1 with the idea that we are going to blockade this enemy pawn with a knight. So my main concerns here right now are, can I play queen d3, queen d2, queen a4, or maybe, although it looks a bit strange, do this maneuver with my knight. Or you could even consider this move. So if you are thinking about these types of moves, you are already on the right path. That means you're starting to understand the system. You're thinking about positional play, about improving pieces, not about pushing pawns. But we do have to always be a little bit careful that I don't allow my opponent to at one point push and trade, because then, yeah, the weakness disappears and it's just a 2 versus 2 and a 3 versus 3 here on the queen side, the king side. So I think I'm gonna go for this. It's a very instructive move. We are moving back a knight that was already developed, but it also improved our bishop. Plus we can now blockade this weakness so that we can keep building up the pressure. So I think this was a very good demonstration of optimizing your pieces. My opponent is playing a rook here. You might think, well, you can just capture this and that becomes a weakness, but that's actually not true, because even though this looks weak, these pawns will be connected. So grabbing something like this wouldn't be a good move. Plus, of course, my bishop is already doing quite a good job. Again, I'm looking at all my pieces. What can I improve? Well, we already calculated that we have an open file here. I might as well just put a rook on the open file and see what we can do. That also created a small threat, of course, if my opponent were to play any random move. Now we have double pressure here on this knight. But they are defending it. Okay, so we have to keep looking for a plan. This pawn here that we have is a little bit annoying, because I never want to push this, because the moment I push, they trade away their weakness, and I will always have to keep an eye on this. Right now, I'm mainly looking at these two pieces. Before I do anything, I look at these two pieces. Why? They are the ones we need to optimize. So we can either go in with the queen, or we can move the rook. But if we move the queen, this pawn is unprotected. So I'm going to defend this with the rook first. It's a bit of a passive job for the rook, but at least this frees up my queen. They are trying to attack this pawn. Now a bunch of things can happen. Queen b3, of course, is no longer such an amazing move, because this leads to doubled pawns. Playing something like queen d2 always leads to a pawn loss. So whenever your opponent makes a move, of course, you cannot just continue with your plan. You want to do some quick calculation as well. So there are a couple of things we can do. I think many players would just immediately think, I'm going to push this pawn. I think that's not the worst response, but I'm always a little bit careful with pushing. I think there might also be some line, let me show you, there might also be some line where we try to counterattack with a knight. And if they take this, we take here, and then as you can see, we potentially have this fork. The only thing with this move is, of course, they don't have to take. They can always just move their queen, and I really liked my knight blockading this pawn. So here I will make a pawn move, just one move with the pawn, because we have a very good reason to move the pawn. The reason is, 1, otherwise we would lose it. 2, we're also taking away a potential square for this knight. So all of our plans can become better in the future. They are trying to pin this to the queen so they can potentially win it. Things are getting very interesting here. you might think, oh no, maybe I have to play something like this, and then you would be losing because you are starting to push pawns near your king. And you never want to push pawns near your king. I usually try to avoid pawn pushing in general. You could also think, I'm going to play something like h3, but you can already see there is quite some pressure buildup. Plus, we also again create a weakness here. But there are many tactics in this position. Although it looks like it wins material, actually runs into a fork. Wow, I cannot draw arrows. Yeah, a fork. And this, although it looks like it wins material as well, now the bishop is just pinned. So I think this pawn to h3 plan is a very interesting plan that we have. One other thing we can also do is we can just move the queen, because again, yeah, they cannot really capture this because there would be a fork. So what move am I going to pick? I usually always pick the move that doesn't involve pushing my pawns, because that gives me extra flexibility. And my opponent didn't see the tactic. So that means we got a free win. Knight to f4. Attack the queen, attack the bishop, and we can trade. And I was going to say now, if they take, we just take, and if they move the rook, we can just go for a mass trade-off. So yeah, we were able to win. You might think, well, how is it possible your opponent makes this blunder? It's a 2300 bot. Yeah, sure. But the entire point is that we kept on playing the most safe moves time and time again. If you look at this, our pawn structure is almost identical from the beginning. We just kept on optimizing our pieces. And when you keep doing that, there will always be a moment like this where your opponent just completely fumbles the game and they mess up. Here also, there are so many things going on here. I mean, we can just take this. We could also have put the bishop here. There are a bunch of lines, but I'm just going to see if there is something very simple. If we can just trade everything, because trading everything will give us a bishop up endgame. This pawn, although it looks free, we are in some trouble here. Suddenly we get checked and we lose our queen. So even when we are up material, we still have to do some calculation. So what can we do here? Well, I think we do have to be careful for back rank problems. That's one thing. I also would really like to trade queens, because whenever we trade queens, we will always have a winning position. This also looks interesting because we centralize the knight and we might have a fork. Depends a little bit on your opponent. If you are playing a lower rated opponent, for sure, this would be the right move. We have a very interesting pattern here, I see. Well, we have multiple moves that win the game, but there is a very interesting way we can force a trade of queens. And that is to take this pawn. Because if they recapture, now we get a fork. All because we were thinking about setting up tactics. And now this is just an endgame in which we are up a full piece. Now I'm also up a pawn temporarily. So how do you finish an endgame like this when you are up material? It is very important that we don't trade all of the pawns, because if I trade all of the pawns and then they sack their knight for my last remaining pawn, because I will always have one more, it can become a little bit difficult to win the endgame. So the main thing I will be doing is I will try to hunt down this pawn first. If I can, I'm going to just keep attacking. And now, okay, they are able to defend it, but they are also in a very defensive position. So that's not bad. Also, I can just add an extra attacker here. So yeah, we're just going to win an extra pawn. If they push, we win. And since we now have 2 extra pawns, we have a very simple plan. It doesn't matter much. I think everything is fine. I'm going to keep it closer to my pawn. Now that we have a very simple plan, we should start pushing. This knight is currently blocking that. So we might need to move around a little bit so we can start pushing. And that's just the plan. We don't have to do anything spectacular here. We can just push. And then at some point, I think we might have bishop here attacking the knight. Okay, they come closer with the king, and now I can trade. I know I will... Well, I'm actually not going to lose this pawn. I was going to say I might lose this pawn. It's actually not even true. And now this is a very easy endgame. It doesn't even really matter. Every move here is winning. Even if we give away the knight, it's winning. I'm going to create an extra passed pawn as well. And yeah, that's going to be the end of this game. I'm not going to show the rest of this game. As you can see, I have multiple ways to make a queen. So it's very easy. So I hope you were able to learn a little bit more about my favorite playstyle with this video. If you enjoyed this, subscribe. And of course, you can also request an opening. That's it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.